The Valley Current.
Have you ever had to gently take the car keys away from an older relative?
Oh, man.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, it is this incredibly universal, just completely agonizing rite of passage.
It's the worst. It really
You're
is.
sitting there at the kitchen table, and you're trying to have a conversation with someone you deeply, deeply respect. Like, maybe it's a parent, someone who raised you.
The person who taught you how to drive in the first place, usually.
Exactly. And you are trying to explain, as delicately as humanly possible, that the reflexes just, they aren't what they used to be.
Yeah.
And the reaction's almost always defensive. I mean, it's heartbreaking, it's awkward, and it usually takes, months? Sometimes years of private family whispers before anyone actually works up the courage to intervene.
Because it feels like a fundamental stripping of agency. You aren't just taking away a piece of metal. You're challenging their capacity to navigate the world independently.
Right. It's a huge blow to the ego. Now, I want you, the listener, to take that exact same kitchen table dynamic, that exact same human frailty, but scale it up to the highest possible stakes.
Okay.
Imagine that relative doesn't just have the keys to a Honda Accord. Mm-hmm. Imagine they have their finger on the nuclear button.
Oh, wow.
Or, imagine they hold a lifetime appointment to the federal bench where they're making decisions that will alter the fabric of society for generations long after they're gone. How do we even handle that?
It is a staggering leap in consequence, but, and this is the crazy part, the underlying biological reality is identical.
Right.
We are dealing with the human brain aging. And what makes this so incredibly difficult at a systemic level is that we desperately want a clean, mathematical, medical solution, right, to a problem that our legal system treats as inherently political.
Yes.
We want a diagnostic certainty that, it simply doesn't exist in the way we've structured our laws.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is the exact collision course we are exploring today. Our source material for this deep dive is just a phenomenal July 2026 litigation-grade analysis.
It's a great read.
Authored by Jack Russo. He's the managing partner at Computer Law Group, LLP. And the core mission of this deep dive today is to really look at this growing, completely unavoidable gap between what we call lifespan and brain span in our leadership.
Which is a crucial distinction.
Totally. We are going to separate the incredibly high emotional temperature of public discourse from the very blunt, highly demanding legal tools we actually have to deal with it.
And setting the right tone here is just, it's vital. Because, look, biology is stubbornly nonpartisan.
It really is. It doesn't care who you voted for.
Exactly.
So to you, the listener, here's our baseline rule for today, right? We are going to be discussing highly publicized, politically charged figures from across the political spectrum. We have to.
Because they're the live test cases of the constitutional framework. You can't avoid talking about them.
Right. We'll be looking at the presidency. We'll be looking at the late Senator Dianne Feinstein. We'll be examining federal judges. But our goal here is completely impartial.
Completely.
We are not here to play armchair neurologists. We are not taking political sides. We are simply exploring the legal realities, the structural gaps, and the historical precedents exactly as this rigorous analysis lays them out.
Because honestly, if you view this solely through a partisan lens, you miss the systemic crisis entirely. Every single institution in America right now is grappling with this demographic reality.
Let's start right there, actually, with the biological reality. Because to understand the legal problem, we first have to understand why this is happening now more than ever.
Yeah, the demographics are wild.
Right. The people who govern us,
yeah,
federal judges, senators, governors, presidents, they are on average older in the 2020s than at almost any point in American history. And our source makes this brilliant foundational distinction between health span and brain span.
Which is so important.
We tend to conflate the two, don't we? Like constantly.
We do, all the time. And it's a profound misunderstanding of modern medicine. What's fascinating here is how longevity science has just fundamentally altered the timeline of human capability.
Okay, how so?
Well, over the last 50 years, we have basically mastered the health span. We have incredible cardiac care, advanced pharmaceuticals, joint replacements, preventative medicine. We are remarkably good at keeping the human chassis running.
So a leader in their 80s or 90s, they can have the physical stamina to maintain a grueling international travel schedule.
Exactly.
They can stand at a podium for 2 hours, shake 100 hands, and look incredibly robust.
Precisely. Their cardiovascular system is functioning beautifully, but brain span, that operates on a completely different biological curve.
Right.
When we talk about brain span, we are talking about cognitive reserve. We are talking about executive function, the ability to synthesize novel information under stress, and very commonly, word retrieval.
Word retrieval, yeah. That's a big one.
The physical architecture of the brain, the neuroplasticity, it simply doesn't age at the exact same rate as the heart or the lungs, no matter how many miles you run on the treadmill.
Man, this makes so much sense. Because you can have the heart of an absolute ox, but under the glare of television lights, when you are exhausted, you might struggle to pull a specific noun out of your memory.
Yeah.
The physical vigor kind of masks the cognitive vulnerability.
And that masking effect is exactly why the public gets so confused and honestly so angry. We see someone who looks physically capable, but who suddenly loses their train of thought in this spectacular way.
Right.
And the public immediately assumes something nefarious is going on, or that there is like an easy medical button to press to fix it.
Which brings us to the cultural flashpoint that really ignited this specific analysis from Jack Russo. Let's look at how desperately and often inaccurately, the public tries to diagnose this gap in real time.
Yeah, this part is fascinating.
The analysis centers on a very specific, highly visible event. This is the White House Correspondents' Dinner that took place on July 24, 2026.
It's a perfect case study of this dynamic in action.
To set the scene impartially, based purely on the reported facts, this was a rescheduled event. It was held at the Waldorf Astoria, scaled down, heavily secured. President Trump is at the dais giving the traditional speech.
Right.
And according to the reporting, the speech veered heavily off script. It mixed some lighthearted material with very pointed, direct insults toward named journalists in the room. And the reaction, according to the press accounts, was a lot of stunned silence.
Right. And what's critical here, from an analytical standpoint, isn't the political content of the insults. It's the structural delivery and the president's own reported awareness of it.
Right. Mid-delivery, he reportedly called his own remarks a frickin' stupid speech.
Yeah.
But there is one specific attributable detail that our source highlights as this fascinating non-diagnostic fact. During the speech, the president told a scripted joke about the gerontocracy in Congress. The joke fell completely flat with the room, and he remarked, right for the podium, that the joke about aging leadership was the only thing he thought was good in this whole frickin' stupid speech.
That moment is the pivot. It's the one moment where the theme of aging leadership was raised by the president himself.
Oh, interesting.
Projected onto Congress, rather than by his critics projected onto him.
It's a stunning moment of irony. And then, of course, the dinner ends, the articles are published, and the internet immediately does what the internet does.
It explodes.
It explodes. It was an absolute feeding frenzy in the hours following that dinner. The comment sections, the social media feeds. What was everyone shouting? The 25th Amendment? Get a doctor in there?
The public immediately demands a clinical intervention for what they perceive as a political and cognitive crisis.
Right.
And what I find so insightful about Jack Russo's analysis is that it actually treats this public reaction as a primary subject of study.
Oh, I love this part.
Yeah. The firm analyzed over 3,300 reader comments from the immediate press coverage just to see exactly how the lay public reasons about cognitive capacity.
I really want to break this down because it shows how flawed our collective radar is. Let's look at the distinct themes they found in those thousands of comments. Theme number 1, physical appearance framing.
This was a massive cluster. A huge percentage of commenters focused entirely on visual signs.
Like what?
How he looked, his posture, the tone of his skin, his physical gait. This is the classic fundamental error of the layperson, conflating visible aging with cognitive decline.
It's so true. We literally judge the book by its weathered cover.
Exactly. And this is precisely why courts of law require rigorous, standardized neuropsychological testing, not photographs, to determine capacity.
Right, because visible aging cuts both ways.
Completely. Looking old, having a tremor, or walking stiffly, that does not mean your executive function is failing.
Yeah, my grandfather had a terrible tremor, but he was as sharp as a tack until he was 95.
Exactly. Conversely, looking remarkably youthful because of great genetics or, cosmetic intervention, that doesn't mean your brain's processing speed is intact. Visuals are simply not diagnostics.
Okay, theme number 2 in the comments. Repetition of material complaints. People were pointing out that he was repeating jokes and grievances from earlier in the year.
Now, this one has actual clinical merit. In a proper geriatric assessment, looping or strict repetition of material is a genuinely relevant signal. Neurologists actually look for that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. However, the analysis makes a crucial distinction here. A single data point from one high-pressure speech is not a clinical workup, it is an observation.
Sure.
To leap from he repeated a joke to he is clinically incapacitated is a bridge way too far for any credentialed clinician.
I want to challenge the public's thinking on this because it feels like trying to diagnose a complex transmission issue in your car just by listening to the engine hum as it drives by you on the highway.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right. You might hear a rattle. You might think, that sounds off. But you are not a mechanic. You don't have the hood open. You aren't hooked up to a diagnostic computer. And you certainly don't have the authority to impound the vehicle.
No, you don't.
Yet the entire internet comment section is absolutely convinced they know exactly which gear is slipping.
The public is hearing a rattle and demanding an engine replacement without understanding the tools required to actually verify the problem.
Let's hit the other themes quickly. Theme 3 was the bipartisan invocation of comparators.
Right. This is where we see the public pattern matching. Commenters weren't just attacking the president. They were pulling in other aging officials from across the political spectrum as reference points.
Like saying, well, look at Biden, look at McConnell.
Exactly. They are recognizing that this is a systemic demographic issue, not just an isolated incident. They are seeing this structural vulnerability everywhere.
And then theme 4 was institutional failure framing. Blaming Congress, blaming the cabinet, blaming the press for enabling it.
It's an implicit demand for someone, somewhere, to pull an emergency lever. The public assumes the system has built-in fail-safes for this, and they are angry that the fail-safes aren't being activated.
Which brings us perfectly to the core legal reality.
Yeah.
The public is screaming for the 25th Amendment.
Right.
They believe the fail-safe is right there ready to be used. So let's explore what that actually requires.
This is where the legal reality hits the public expectation like a freight train.
Seriously.
The analysis provides an incredibly detailed breakdown of the 25th Amendment, specifically Section 4, which is the involuntary removal mechanism. And what it reveals is how profoundly mismatched the law is to what the public assumes.
The public seems to think Section 4 is a medical emergency cord. Like, if the president forgets a name or gives a rambling speech, the doctor signs a note, the vice president pulls the cord, and boom, it's handled.
Not even close.
Walk us through the actual mechanics. How does a Section 4 invocation even begin?
Okay, so it begins exclusively with the vice president. The vice president, alongside a majority of the principal officers of the executive departments, meaning the cabinet, must transmit a written declaration to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House.
Right.
This declaration must state explicitly that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office.
Wait, let me stop you right there. Only the vice president can start this.
Yes. The text says the VP and a majority of the cabinet or such other body as Congress may by law provide.
Oh, right.
But Congress has never created that other body. So in reality, it requires the vice president to lead a coalition of the president's own hand-picked cabinet members. No one else in the federal government can initiate this.
Okay, so let's play this out. Let's say the vice president and the cabinet majority actually do this. They send the letter. What happens?
The moment that written declaration is transmitted to Congress, the vice president immediately assumes the powers and duties of the office as acting president.
Boom. Done. But that's not the end of the story, right? The president isn't just permanently fired at that exact moment.
Far from it, because the president has a direct countermove.
Which is?
If the president transmits his own written declaration to Congress stating that no inability exists, he immediately resumes the full powers of his office.
Wait. So the vice president and half the cabinet declare in writing, the president is incapacitated. The president writes a note saying, no, I'm not, I'm fine. Mm-hmm. And the president just gets the clear codes back.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Yes. Unless the vice president and the cabinet majority double down.
Oh, wow.
They have exactly 4 days to transmit a second declaration restating the inability. If they do that, the president does not resume power, and the dispute is immediately thrown to Congress.
And what is the timeline for Congress to sort out this massive constitutional crisis?
Congress must assemble within 48 hours if they aren't already in session. From there, they have exactly 21 days to decide the issue.
Okay, here is where it gets absolutely wild. What is the voting threshold for Congress to side with the vice president and keep the president out of power?
It requires a massive 2/3 supermajority vote of both houses of Congress to sustain the vice president as acting president.
Wait, both houses?
Let me repeat that. 2/3 of the House, A&D, 2/3 of the Senate. If they fail to reach that supermajority in either chamber, the president immediately resumes the powers of his office.
Okay, let's step back and look at this. Section 4 isn't a medical emergency cord anyone can just pull. It's an emergency brake on a speeding train. But to pull it, you need a dozen cabinet members to turn their keys simultaneously.
Yes.
And if the conductor disagrees and grabs the brake back, you need an entire stadium of lawmakers to outvote him with a 2/3 supermajority in a highly partisan environment.
It is an intentionally agonizing hurdle.
But here's the most glaring omission in everything you just described. Where are the doctors? There's the medical panel. Where's the required neurological evaluation?
There aren't any.
None.
None. And this is the great shock for anyone reading the text of the Constitution for the first time. Section 4 of the 25th Amendment is entirely silent on the definition of inability.
That is wild.
There is no statutory elaboration. There is no mandated evidentiary standard. It does not require an MRI. It does not require a psychiatrist. It doesn't even require a doctor's note. It is a purely political process masquerading in the public consciousness as a clinical one.
Why on earth did they write it that way? If you were dealing with physical or mental inability, why wouldn't the framers mandate a medical standard?
You have to look at when and why this was written. The 25th Amendment was championed in the 1960s, largely in the shadow of the Kennedy assassination.
Okay.
But it was also haunted by the history of Woodrow Wilson's stroke, where his wife effectively hid his condition from the public, and James Garfield lingering for months after being shot. The framers of this amendment deliberately engineered it to bias heavily toward presidential continuity.
Because they were afraid of what?
They were terrified of creating a low-threshold removal mechanism that could be weaponized for a political coup.
Oh, I see. So they intentionally made it a political test, not a medical one.
Exactly. They believed that if a president's impairment was so severe, so universally obvious that it justified overturning a democratic election, it would naturally generate a bipartisan supermajority consensus.
Right. Like, if it's that bad, everyone will agree.
Right. They didn't want a panel of 3 doctors being able to decapitate the executive branch. They wanted to ensure that if you are going to remove a sitting elected president against their will, you need an overwhelming political consensus across both the executive and legislative branches.
But this raises a huge problem for the modern era. If it requires an overwhelming bipartisan political consensus, will a cabinet ever actually use it for the kind of slow, nuanced cognitive decline we are seeing today?
History suggests they won't. The analysis notes that Section 4 has never been invoked over a contested capacity dispute in history. Never. The only time the 25th Amendment is used is under Section 3, which is the voluntary, temporary transfer of power for scheduled medical procedures.
Like a president going under anesthesia for a colonoscopy.
Exactly. Section 4, the involuntary mechanism, is practically a dead letter for slow cognitive decline because the political cost of initiating it against your own party's leader is suicidal unless the impairment is absolute and undeniable.
It's the ultimate blunt instrument. It requires so much force to swing that nobody wants to pick it up.
So we've established that the presidency is intensely difficult to check because of these political supermajority requirements. The electoral mandate provides this massive shield.
Yes.
But let's look at the flip side of that coin. What happens when you remove politics, elections, and voters from the equation entirely?
It gets worse.
Right. Does the Constitution do a better job handling cognitive decline when the person doesn't have to answer to voters? Let's talk about the federal judiciary, because this is where the gap between brain span and lifespan becomes a literal lifetime trap. Yeah, if you think the 25th Amendment is messy, the situation on the federal bench is arguably much, much worse.
Because there's no election to shield them, but there's also no election to remove them.
Right. The shield isn't an electoral mandate. The shield is constitutional life tenure. And the analysis provides a fascinating and frankly tragic case study that is playing out right now in real time. It involves a federal judge, not a president.
We were talking about Judge Pauline Newman.
Yes. Judge Pauline Newman is a highly respected, deeply influential jurist on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. Yeah. She was appointed by President Ronald Reagan all the way back in 1984. As of this analysis in 2026, she is 99 years old.
99 years old on the federal bench.
Yes. And she has been locked in a bitter, unprecedented legal battle with her own colleagues on the bench.
It's incredible to think about someone sitting on the federal bench at 99. I was reading the timeline in the source material, and the evidentiary clash here is just wild. How did this dispute actually start?
According to the timeline, concerns from her colleagues began accumulating around a health episode in 2021, and then a reported fainting incident in 2022.
Okay.
Colleagues and staff began raising alarms behind closed doors about her cognitive processing speed and her capacity to handle the deeply complex, demanding patent and administrative law cases that the Federal Circuit is known for.
Patent law is no joke. That is dense material.
It's incredibly dense. Ultimately, the chief judge of the Federal Circuit, Kimberly Moore, initiated a formal judicial misconduct and disability complaint against Judge Newman.
Just pause and think about the human element of that. The chief judge has to initiate a formal complaint against a colleague she has sat next to for years. The institutional burden of that is immense.
It's an agonizing position. I mean, Chief Judge Moore convened a special committee to investigate, and that committee ordered Judge Newman to submit to neurological testing and to hand over her medical records.
And this is where it gets incredibly legally messy, right?
Yeah.
Because Judge Newman didn't just quietly comply.
No, she fought back. Hard. And the evidentiary conflict that emerged is glaring. Judge Newman submitted reports from her own retained independent doctors.
Oh, she got her own doctor.
Yeah. 2 independent physicians examined her and found her to be cognitively intact and fit to serve.
So her doctors say she's fine.
Right. Meanwhile, the court's special committee, relying on their own evaluators, staff interviews, and observations of her workflow, found probable cause that her health left her without the capacity to do the job.
So you have a genuine high-stakes clash of medical and observational experts, dueling doctors.
Exactly.
One side says she is perfectly capable of rendering federal appellate decisions. The other side says she is fundamentally compromised. Legally, who even breaks a tie like that when there's no boss above a federal judge?
That is exactly the structural trap. The constitutional structure has no mechanism above colleagues investigating colleagues to resolve this cleanly.
Wow.
The Judicial Council of the Federal Circuit essentially ran out of patience. They offered her what is known as senior status.
Okay, what is senior status?
It's the traditional, graceful off-ramp for aging federal judges. It's a form of semi-retirement where the judge keeps their office, their title, and their clerk, but they take a significantly reduced caseload.
So they're still around, but doing less.
Right. It's designed to preserve their dignity while protecting the court's workflow.
But Judge Newman refused it.
She refused it entirely. So in September 2023, the Judicial Council escalated. They suspended her from hearing any new cases. They essentially benched her.
And they have simply been renewing that suspension annually ever since.
Yes.
And she sued them. A sitting federal judge sued her own colleagues.
She filed a federal civil action, Newman v. Moore, and her argument raises a profound constitutional question. She argued that she is an Article III judge.
Meaning life tenure.
Right. Under the Constitution, Article III judges hold their offices during good behavior, which functionally means life tenure. She argued that she cannot be functionally removed from her job by an administrative council of her peers.
She called it an unconstitutional impeachment, right? That is a powerful phrase.
It cuts right to the heart of the separation of powers. She is arguing that the only way to remove an Article III judge is through the formal impeachment process in the United States Congress, which requires the House to impeach and the Senate to convict.
Right, because you can't just have a committee of judges vote to lock a colleague out of her chambers because they disagree on a cognitive assessment.
Exactly.
Wait, I want to challenge that because didn't Congress pass a law specifically to let judges police themselves?
Yes. The Judicial Conduct and Disability Act of 1980, the JCDA. And the analysis breaks down the JCDA structure beautifully. It creates an escalating ladder of remedies for judicial councils.
Like what?
They can issue a private reprimand, they can issue a public censure, they can request a judge take no new cases for a temporary period, but the act explicitly, intentionally stops one step short of actual removal.
Oh, I see.
The Judicial Council cannot remove a judge. They can only refer the matter to the Judicial Conference, which can then refer it to Congress for possible impeachment.
But here is the reality. Congress has absolutely zero appetite for bringing an impeachment proceeding against a 99-year-old jurist over a dispute about cognitive processing speed. Congress uses impeachment for bribery, for treason, for severe ethical misconduct. They don't use it for medical decline.
Exactly. Congress won't act. So the Judicial Council is left holding the bag. To protect the integrity of their court's decisions, they essentially created a workaround.
By just endlessly suspending her.
Right. By indefinitely renewing her suspension from new cases year after year, they have produced a state that is functionally indistinguishable from removal without ever triggering the constitutional requirement of congressional impeachment.
So what did the courts do with her lawsuit? Did she win?
The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals dismissed her claims. But here is the crucial part. They didn't dismiss them on the actual constitutional merits of her argument.
What do you mean?
They didn't rule on whether an indefinite suspension violates Article 3. They dismissed her lawsuit on jurisdictional grounds. They relied on a precedent that basically says the JCDA's structure forecloses most external judicial review of a counsel's disability orders.
They threw it out on a procedural technicality. They essentially said, we aren't the right venue to hear this.
Right. So she appealed to the highest court in the land. And here is the climax of the case that our source flags. In June 2026, the Supreme Court denied certiorari. They declined to hear her case.
Meaning what for the listener?
It means that after years of agonizing procedure, millions of dollars in legal fees, 2 independent physician evaluations, and multiple levels of review, the underlying constitutional question was never answered.
Wow.
Can an administrative counsel functionally sideline a life-tenured judge for incapacity without Congress? The merits of that question remain completely unresolved.
Think about the precedent that sets. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the irony here is just absolutely breathtaking. The Supreme Court justices who declined to hear Judge Newman's case, they sit under the exact same Article 3 life tenure system, but with even less oversight than she has.
It is the ultimate institutional blind spot. The JCDA, the very statute used to suspend Judge Newman, it explicitly excludes the Supreme Court.
Right, really?
Yes. There is no mechanism for anyone, not even their fellow justices, to file a misconduct or disability complaint against a sitting Supreme Court justice under that act.
The source document calls it an obituary-only review. That is a chilling, perfectly accurate phrase.
Supreme Court justices have no term limits, no mandatory retirement age, and no external fitness reviews whatsoever. They answer to no one but history.
And we have seen, historically, justices remaining on the bench well past traditional retirement age, sometimes even when their faculties were visibly failing because they didn't want the opposing political party to nominate their successor.
It happens all the time.
And the court fiercely resists any legislative attempts at reform, right?
Absolutely. Whether it's proposals for 18-year staggered terms or a mandatory retirement age or an independent mental fitness review board, the court, as an institution, pushes back.
What's their argument?
They argue that such reforms would compromise the absolute independence that Article 3 was built to protect, and that imposing them would require a constitutional amendment, not just a statute.
So let's recap the structural nightmare we are in. The presidency relies on an impossibly high political bar, a 2/3 supermajority in Congress with the 25th Amendment.
Right.
The lower federal courts rely on a legally dubious indefinite suspension mechanism because Congress won't impeach for aging. And the highest court in the land has literally no mechanism for capacity review other than voluntary retirement or death.
That is the landscape we're dealing with.
So does any office in the federal or state structure actually get this right? Let's move to the middle ground. Let's talk about the spectrum of accountability, because not every office is a lifetime appointment and not every office is protected by a nuclear briefcase.
The analysis does a brilliant comparative breakdown here, looking at how different structural designs handle the aging brain span. Let's start with governors.
Right.
The shorthand used in the text is go to governors of the United States.
What makes a governor structurally different when it comes to cognitive decline?
It's the ruthless frequency of the accountability cycle. Governors typically have 2 to 4 year terms. They face frequent, highly competitive elections. Plus, many states have active recall mechanisms.
So the voters actually get a regular say.
More than just a say. The structure of a gubernatorial race forces a rigorous, constant capacity check. A governor has to debate live.
Right.
They have to travel across their state constantly. They have to answer to a local press corps that tracks their every move. They have to negotiate directly with state legislatures on granular budget issues.
You can't hide a governor in a basement.
You really can't. The analysis points out that there are governors well into their 70s and 80s who run demonstrably effective, high-energy administrations.
Why?
Because the relentless electoral cycle inherently weeds out severe cognitive decline much faster than the federal system. If a governor is truly slipping, the primary challengers within their own party will expose it instantly. The structure works as a filter.
Okay, that makes sense for governors. But what about the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives? They have elections too. A representative runs every 2 years. A senator runs every 6 years. Why isn't that same electoral cycle a sufficient check for Congress?
In theory, it should be the perfect check. But structurally, the machinery of incumbency in Congress creates an entirely different reality.
Okay, how so?
And the analysis impartially brings up the most cited, poignant, recent example of this, which was widely acknowledged by both sides of the aisle, the late Senator Dianne Feinstein's final term.
Let's talk about that. And again, we are looking at this not as a partisan critique, but as a structural failure.
Yeah.
How does a senator, whose decline is widely recognized, stay in office through multiple election cycles?
It's because the congressional structure actively insulates incumbents from the kind of brutal vetting a governor faces. First, you have massive incumbency advantages in fundraising and name recognition. Second, you have abysmally low primary turnout in many states, meaning an entrenched incumbent rarely faces a serious, well-funded challenge from within their own party.
But the real trap is the committee structure, isn't it?
Exactly. It's seniority-based committee power. A state's political establishment does not want to vote out an aging senator, even if they know the senator is declining.
Why? Because they'd lose the seat?
Not just the seat. They would lose the immense power, the federal funding, and the influence that comes with senior committee chairmanships. If you replace an 85-year-old committee chair with a sharp 45-year-old freshman, your state goes to the back of the line for federal resources.
The incentives are completely warped. A state will actively vote to keep someone in power who shouldn't be there, just to keep the seniority.
Yes. And structurally, how do they manage the daily workload if the senator is impaired? Through their staff. The congressional system allows staff to essentially function as shadow senators. The staff can brief the member, write the questions for hearings, shield them from unscripted press interactions, and manage the voting schedule.
So a genuinely impaired member can serve for years, long past the point where their own family, their staff, and their peers privately acknowledge the decline, simply because the political machine around them keeps propping them up like Weekend at Bernie's to maintain committee power.
Basically, yeah.
The election exists on paper, but it's completely failing as a capacity check.
It's a collective institutional denial.
So when you look at all of this, governors with a rigorous check, senators with a weak check, presidents with an almost impossible political check, and judges with no check at all, what is the solution?
That's $1 million question.
The most common thing you hear people scream for on social media right after the 25th Amendment is term limits. Just put a blanket rule on it. Nobody over 75 can run for office or sit on a bench.
It's an incredibly popular sentiment, and the analysis dedicates a specific section to this debate. Should term limits be imposed across the board?
Term limits are like a software subscription that forces you to update your leadership every few years, right?
Yeah.
Whereas life tenure is like buying a grandfather clock in 1787 and just hoping the gears never wear out because nobody ever built a key to open the glass case.
That's a great way to put it.
So what is the legal and structural argument for and against uniform age limits?
The case for a blanket rule, like a mandatory retirement age of 75 or 80, is that it forces a periodic capacity review by default. It is totally impartial.
Right.
It completely removes the awkwardness, the political weaponization, and the trauma of having to single someone out. You never have to have the agonizing fight that Chief Judge Moore had with Judge Newman.
You just follow the rule.
The rule just says, hey, the clock ran out, time to go, thank you for your service.
It takes the emotion completely out of it.
Yes. And proponents argue that it aligns our constitutional rules with modern longevity data that the framers in 1787 simply couldn't have anticipated. They didn't foresee a world where half the Senate might live to be 90.
But the case against is really compelling too, isn't it?
It is, because a blanket age rule is an incredibly blunt proxy. It is a hatchet, not a scalpel.
Right.
If you impose a mandatory retirement age of 75, you will solve the problem of cognitive decline, but you will inevitably remove demonstrably sharp, highly capable leaders at the exact same time.
You lose the good with the bad.
Exactly. You trade the risk of entrenchment for the absolute loss of profound institutional memory and hard-earned expertise. Think of the diplomatic relationships, the legislative mastery, the judicial wisdom that can peak in a person's late 70s.
Yeah, that's true.
As the analysis notes, this is a genuine structural trade-off. It is not a free lunch.
And practically speaking, imposing term limits or a mandatory retirement age on the Supreme Court or the presidency would require a constitutional amendment. That is a deliberately high bar that is almost statistically impossible to clear in our current polarized political climate.
Which is why the analysis suggests that a single blanket rule is structurally flawed anyway. You can't apply the same solution to every office because the offices are distinctly different.
Right.
A tool calibrated for a 4-year executive just won't fit a life-tenured judge or a 6-year senator.
So what is the middle path? If term limits are too blunt and the 25th Amendment is too hard, what do governance scholars actually favor?
The growing consensus among legal and medical scholars is a shift toward mandatory, confidential, periodic cognitive screening built into the office itself.
Okay, how would that work?
Think of it like a director's and officer's fitness review in a major corporation, or how commercial airline pilots have mandatory routine medical evaluations to keep their license. It doesn't rely on a hard age cutoff.
So an 85-year-old who passes the screening keeps flying.
Exactly. But it creates a routine, non-stigmatizing off-ramp for those who need it while preserving capable elders.
Which is a perfect pivot because I want to bring this entirely out of the theoretical constitutional realm and talk directly to you, the listener, for a moment. What does this all mean for you?
Right.
You probably aren't sitting on the Supreme Court. You probably aren't the president. But you might be sitting on a corporate board. You might be a managing partner in a law firm or a medical practice. You might be the next generation leader in a closely held family business.
Exactly.
How do everyday organizations avoid these high-stakes constitutional car crashes when the founder or the senior partner starts to slip?
This is where Jack Russo's analysis transitions from constitutional theory to incredibly practical, actionable advice. Computer Law Group has a deep background in alternative dispute resolution.
Right.
Specifically what they call FFCDR, Founder-Friendly Creative Dispute Resolution. And their core guiding insight for the private sector is a philosophy they summarize as grace over force.
Grace over force. It's such a powerful framing. Let's define exactly what those two paths look like in reality. What is force in this context?
Force is using the blunt instruments of the law. Force is the cabinet invoking the 25th Amendment against a president's will. Force is a judicial council locking a 99-year-old judge out of her chambers.
And in the private sector?
In the private sector, force involves public evidentiary battles, subpoenas for medical records, brutal shareholder lawsuits, and boardroom coups.
It's essentially declaring war on the person who built the institution.
Exactly. And the analysis is explicit about the cost. Every single use of force is a systemic failure of earlier governance systems. It causes lasting institutional trauma.
I can imagine.
Organizations spend years, sometimes decades, recovering from the cultural damage of a forced removal. It destroys trust, it destroys family relationships, and it strips the aging leader of their agency and dignity.
So if force is the failure state, what is grace?
Grace involves private conversations among senior advisors or family members long before a crisis hits the papers. It's urging a graceful exit.
Like what we talked about with the judges.
Exactly. It's offering the corporate equivalent of senior status, creating a role where the founder has reduced daily operational duties, but allows them to retain their title, their corner office, and their dignity as a visionary or chairman emeritus.
It's structuring a transition where the person feels they have a say in their own departure, rather than being perp-walked out of their own legacy.
Precisely. History overwhelmingly favors grace where it is available because it preserves institutional trust. But grace isn't just about being polite. It requires structural foresight.
Let's give the listener some tools here. The analysis asks some really pointed reflection questions for readers to apply to their own organizations.
These are great.
Question 1. Does your organization have a capacity-triggered succession clause in its bylaws? And crucially, was it drafted while everyone was healthy and well, or are you trying to draft it only after someone started showing signs of decline?
That timing is absolutely everything. The core ADR insight worth exporting here is that you must build the off-ramp before it is ever needed. If you try to impose a capacity check or a medical evaluation after a dispute arises, after the founder starts forgetting names in client meetings, it feels like an attack. It triggers deep defensiveness.
Because it is an attack. It's reactive.
Right. But if a neutral, independent evaluator is pre-selected in the governance documents years in advance while the founder is completely healthy and they sign off on it.
Oh, then it's totally different.
Exactly. And invoking the check 10 years later isn't an accusation. It's just following the agreed-upon rules of the road.
It's the difference between forcing someone to jump out of a moving vehicle on the highway because the brakes failed versus building a really comfortable, beautifully paved exit ramp that they actually help design the blueprints for themselves.
That is exactly it. You want the graceful exit built into the architecture. The analysis recommends specific mechanical things for private governance drafting.
Like what?
Implement a mandatory, non-stigmatizing periodic review interval for all senior partners. Pre-select a neutral evaluator. Create a voluntary senior status equivalent with retained perks. And critically, include a dispute resolution carve-out, routing any conflict over capacity to neutral private mediation before any unilateral legal action or board vote can be taken.
Grace, structurally embedded in advance, beats grace improvised in a crisis every single time. And it beats law and force every time it is available because it is chosen rather than imposed.
Absolutely.
Whether we are talking about a family hardware business in Ohio or the Cabinet of the United States deciding whether to invoke Section 4, the unresolved question is always the same. Will leaders reach for persuasion and grace, or will they reach for the hard edge of force? Because no single law yet drafted fits the mussy biological reality of aging perfectly.
Which brings us to a final, somewhat haunting point from the analysis. In their A to Z insights list, Insight X is what they call the X factor of self-recognition.
This is the crux of the whole tragedy, isn't it? The blind spot.
It really is. The cases that end the worst, the ones that result in brutal lawsuits, public humiliation, and institutional trauma, are overwhelmingly the ones where the affected leader simply cannot or will not see the decline themselves.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenon psychologists sometimes call identity foreclosure. Who are they without the gavel? Who are they without the nuclear codes? But beyond ego, sometimes the cognitive decline itself biologically masks the awareness of the decline.
They literally lose the capacity to judge their own capacity.
Exactly. And so it leaves us with a provocative thought for every listener to ponder, regardless of where you sit in your career. How sure are you that you would know when it's your time to step down?
That's a heavy question.
And more importantly, who in your life do you trust enough to listen to when they finally come to the kitchen table and tell you it's time to hand over the keys?
Led by Jack Russo, Computer Law Group LLP is a bespoke business litigation and founder-friendly boutique law firm with offices and licensed attorneys in Silicon Valley, New York, and Tampa Bay. And you can reach Jack at computerlaw.com and his team at www.computerlaw.com, where the newsletter we referred to is published in detail and readily available, commitment-free with no paywalls or other charges.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.